live, and we're going to start recording. So, hi everybody that's out there. Just Facebook's just now letting everybody know that we're live. But hello, Amy, and hello, Anna. How are you, Anna? Amy, how are you today?
I'm fine, thank you.
Good. And Anna, I always like to kind of find out or let people know where you all are calling in from. So Amy, I believe, are you on the Jersey Shore? Is that where you're at?
Yes, I am. I'm right at the Jersey Shore.
And we were just talking in the green room a little bit. You just had a launch event, I guess, on Tuesday of this week for the book. Congratulations. And I love that you said the people that had lived there all their life learned something new in this discussion. So I'm hoping that we'll get some good things that'll happen with that too. And Anna, I think you are in the Miami area, is that correct?
I am in the Miami area. So we were both actually before, when we first connected, we realized we had both lived all our lives somewhere near the water and been on boats in ocean.
I love it. Well, this is going to be a great conversation. You both are going to bring some great things to this. So just for people who are, Warwick's is located on the West Coast. So we are in La Jolla, San Diego. La Jolla is just a little bit north of the San Diego proper area. So we've got the coast covered. So hopefully we'll have some people joining in the middle as well to this evening or this afternoon or wherever you're calling in from. Couple things about Warwick's and what you can do for this event and for getting the book. If you're watching this on YouTube, sorry that we're not live with you, but it's going to be a great conversation. So stay with us because I think it's just going to be fascinating. I love the cover. I can't wait to talk about all this stuff. So, but if you're joining us on Facebook, in the comment section, I'm going to put a link on how to order both Amy and Anna's book. So you can get those shipped to you if you don't live in the San Diego area. But if you do, we'd love for you to come by the store. Lots of great things to see at Warwick's. We have one whole side that's just books, but the other side is gifts and jewelry and pens and all kinds of fun stuff. So come by if you're in the San Diego area and visit us there. Also in that comment section, once I go off screen, Amy and Anna are going to talk for about 35 minutes about the book, give or take a little bit. But if you have any questions, that comment section is where to put those on Facebook. And we love the audience questions, so don't be shy and put a question in there because we'd love to hear what you're curious about after you listen to this conversation. So let me introduce these two wonderful authors and I will go off screen. So Amy Hill Hearth, who lives at the Jersey Shore, like we said, is a New York Times, Washington Post, and USA Today bestselling author and a Peabody Award winner. She writes nonfiction as well as fiction for both adults and young readers. Silent Came the Monster is her first thriller. Her areas of interest include American history, elder wisdom, which I love, and forgotten or little-known stories. Her ancestors, who include I'm going to mispronounce it, so why don't you say it for me?
Lena
Lenape, woman, called the Jersey Shore home for many generations. So I'm hoping we get a little bit more information about that. So joining Amy today is Anna Veciana-Suarez. Anna is a recipient of a Cintas Fellowship and an Individual Artist Fellowship Award from the state of Florida for fiction writing. A syndicated columnist, her commentary has appeared in O, the Oprah magazine, Women's Day, Reader's Digest, and various newspapers and websites. And her new book is, I'm going to mispronounce that
Dulcinea.
Dulcinea. So we'll find out a little bit about that as well. So ladies, have a great conversation and I'll see you in about a half hour or so.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Amy, we were talking in the green room really how I thought the book was so suddenly topical, even though it takes place in 1916, more than 100 years ago, because in the news, we had 2 shark attacks, one just up the coast from where I live and one over in Hawaii. So that, I mean, sharks, I think there's such a fascination with sharks. So, but what I thought was especially interested in, I loved your book. I couldn't, I had it in digital. I'm like reading it. this is really, I didn't realize this was the first novel about what is really probably the most famous shark attack, at least for U.S. residents, or a history.
Yes.
What got you inspired to do this? How did it work out that you decided, I'm going to write a novel, not a nonfiction book?
Well, there were already 2 nonfiction books written about 25 years ago. And I think I always wanted to write about this in my own way. And then during the pandemic, I was in the mood to tackle it. I wanted to write it as a historical novel from the perspective of the people who lived here at the time, who had no knowledge at all of ocean creatures that we have now. And they were terrified. Generally, people believed here that man-eating or dangerous sharks did not swim in the waters off New York or New Jersey. Even the scientists at that time were saying that was true. So people had become very relaxed about the idea of dangerous sharks. So when this happened, this was a rogue shark, a great white, that killed 4 people and severely injured a 5th in less than 2 weeks in the summer of 1916. It just made its way up the coast, basically attacking people. What fascinated me about this story, and of course I've heard about it for a long time, but what really interested me was the way that people reacted to it, and that they didn't understand it. And the pandemic actually brought this out in me, these thoughts about how people behave when they're feeling threatened by something that they don't expect is going to happen, and something that just comes out of the blue and upends everyone's lives. And that's basically what happened with the shark. At first, there was this tremendous denial, defiance. There were pressures for this, a lot of the businesses wanted to stay open, the hotels and restaurants, because that's how they make their money in a short summer season. There were many different pressures. At first, there were people who said, maybe it's a giant mackerel. And there were people who said, no, it's a gigantic sea turtle. My personal favorite is there were people who were saying that it might be a German U-boat that was spying off the coast, because after all, World War I was going on, and there were a lot of tensions in the country, and especially around here, because in the summer, Woodrow Wilson was here for seven presidents in a row, spent their summers at the Jersey Shore. So this was a place where the wealthy, the genteel, the powerful were spending the summer anyway. So it made people really paranoid that this creature came out of nowhere and attacked people and upset everyone. And it took some doing for people to accept that it was a shark. And in fact, many people just called it a sea monster. I love that they called it a sea monster. But yes, during the pandemic, I started thinking there are parallels between the way that people were feeling and reacting to this invasion and what happened with the 1916 shark. So I think that what I did is I processed my feelings through my writing, my feelings about being in lockdown during the pandemic and the frightening times that we all went through.
Now, the research, you find out from everything from the clothing to essentially the reaction, or even you have, 2 doctors and the view of how it's taken care of. How did you do that during lockdown, and how many resources did you have easily available because you were in the Jersey Shore, essentially?
Well, fortunately, I already had quite a collection of books about New Jersey history. Since my family has lived here a long time, my father collected books. But a lot of the newspapers that covered it were already online, so I was able to read a lot of the old papers. There were a few times where I was frustrated, and I had to wait, or I had to try and track someone down who could send me some information or a book that I really wanted that you couldn't get very easily. So there were some problems that way, but there was so much to research that I would just put that aside and go to the next thing. I mean, when you think about it, this was it was a great project to research, because I had everything from, as you were saying, bathing suits that the women were wearing to there was a very severe polio epidemic going on at the same time. So I was researching what they called infantile paralysis. It was probably the worst polio epidemic in the history of the US. It was happening that same summer, centered right in New Jersey and New York. So there was that. There was also this horrible heat wave that was going on. Crops were failing all across into the Midwest, but mostly the East Coast. It was a very difficult time, and people were very tense about what was happening in Europe with the war. There were many people who wanted America to stay out of the war. And then there were others who thought we should go. So there was that great tension. And, you know, there really were German U-boats out here off the coast of New Jersey. There was one called the Deutschland, which actually sailed under a commercial flag and went from Europe to Baltimore in the middle of all this happening. So you can see how people got this idea in their heads that somehow maybe it has something to do with the war, with the Germans, specifically with these U-boats, because it was very frightening. People didn't understand what was happening, and the Germans were very creative with some of their well, I don't know if you've ever heard of these things called cigar bombs. They invented these little tiny bombs they put on merchant vessels and so on. And then the bombs would go off when they were out to sea and sink the boat. I mean, they were taunting us a bit. They were, some people felt that they were trying to instigate to get us to react in some way, like maybe fire a shot at one of these U-boats. Interestingly, my own grandfather joined the Army and because of the war, and he was stationed at where the Verrazano Bridge now is between Staten Island and Brooklyn. There's a bluff, and right below it is the Verrazano Narrows. It goes into New York City, and that was his job, was to watch for submarines coming through there. So people did have reason to be concerned and upset, but it just shows how the human mind will go in all kinds of directions, and we're not very good at assessing risk. And some people,
and it's the U-boats was something they could see, and when they've never seen a shark,
right?
And I think you also mentioned that it was just when sea bathing was catching up. So it wasn't like people were really familiar with what was going on. They didn't even know a shark could swim in, and some, you know, breeds of shark can swim in brackish water.
Right, there's that too. They were familiar with little sand sharks, but they really didn't think there was anything like a great white shark anywhere near here. Basically, there was even a Coast Guard superintendent who was quoted in the Philadelphia papers as saying, "It's not a shark, don't worry, there's nothing to be worried about. Sharks are as timid as rabbits." So, and the people with the first attack, even the people who saw it were just so shocked. They weren't even sure what they saw. One of the things that I really did want to develop in the book was, it's a sad story, it's a tragedy, but there was also a lot of resilience and bravery, the courage of some of these bystanders and these young lifeguards on these beaches who had no idea what they were getting into, that they went into the water to try and help people. It's just extraordinary. I dedicated the book to the rescuers and the heroes, because I think they really deserve to be remembered. But yes, people were shocked. And if you don't expect something can happen, it really throws everyone for a loop.
You also mix fact and fiction in the sense that there are real people, of course, the real victims, and you're essentially your main narrator, a doctor who nobody believes at the beginning. How did you decide to do that, and how did you blend one with the other? Because he does meet in the book real people, or people who existed at that time.
I really focused at first thinking in terms of the shark attacks themselves have to be factual, right down to every detail that is known. And then I wanted to, there are a number of people, the victims were real people. We researched them and what they were like. The main character is a doctor, and I based him very, very loosely on a real person who was a doctor, head of surgery at Monmouth Medical Center. And he signed off on the autopsy report on one of the victims. And I found that, and I thought it was interesting. That might be an interesting way to tell it, because at that time, there were hardly any surgeons, and they were sort of called to various disasters. People didn't always make it to the emergency room. And so the way I developed it is I thought I'll have this surgeon called to all these scenes. And he has his own story and his own reasons for how he knows quite a bit about sharks. He was a surgeon. And this fellow who was at Monmouth Medical Center, at that time it was called Monmouth Memorial Hospital, he had been a surgeon in the Spanish-American War. So I had that detail in there. But I have him and his complicated life and story as the storyline. And I have bringing in his daughter, who was a lot of fun to write about, who was rebellious and wanted to go swimming. And every time I brought in a new character, it gave me so much new material to research and dive into. I don't outline. I just start, and I mean, obviously I had a framework with certain events with this shark, but in terms of what my characters were doing and how they eventually interact and so on, I just let them speak for themselves. I just started writing, and I really enjoy doing my writing that way. I don't outline at all.
And each of the character develops and arrives to, I would say, their own truth. Yes. And in some way, some painfully, and some by letting go. Was that intentional as well? Did you know, well, this doctor, this child, there's one very cute little boy affected by this. I don't want to give away too much. The daughter as well, and another young lady whose life has completely changed. Did you know, starting off, by the end of the book, I've got to get them here? Or?
I had only the vaguest idea of where I was going to go with it and how it was going to come together. And somehow it just did. I will say that the child that you're referring to, he really was like that, the way I describe him. He was an unusual child, very precocious, interesting child. I don't want to say too much because I don't want to give it away.
Right.
I'm familiar with the story, but there's a lot of ways to research it here, living right here at the shore. Even during the pandemic, I could go out and visit the sites and take photographs and compare to how things looked at the time, if the hotel was still there or not. It was really a wonderful project in a way for if you're cooped up and worried about what was happening with the world.
And with newspapers, I think you can find so many rich details.
Oh, well, you know, there were so many small weeklies. And fortunately, in New Jersey, there was an effort to digitize a lot of these defunct papers. And it's so important. And I really wonder what's going to happen in the future because with the newspaper business suffering the way it is, there's so much material in these old papers. It was interesting to read the stories that were kind of sensational and terrifying from the tabloids from New York and Philadelphia and Washington and even in Chicago about this series of attacks. But the real depth of where you could try and pull together information about the victims was in the little itty bitty papers that don't exist anymore, the weeklies.
Right. Right. It's like letters and diaries. How many people now actually write letters? For historical novelists like us, you know, diaries, newspapers, letters are minefields of details that you can use to do it. And I mean, I don't know how many people save their texts, but
well, that's a good question. Yeah, I think about this sometimes. There's just so much noise out there. People save everything. There's so many photographs now, and people almost never truly organize them or pick through them in any way. I think it's going to be very difficult for people in the future.
Yeah, it will be interesting.
Yeah.
Now, for somebody who's lived in the locale that you write about, do you have an interesting or unusual fact that you learned that you were very surprised? I, for instance, was very surprised that people didn't always go swimming or sea bathing, as you call it. I just thought, you know, you grow up near the ocean, that's what you do, and it wasn't.
Right. Well, in the Victorian era, they started they did this thing called, the women did this thing called fanny dunking, where they actually went into the water and they hooked arms and they waited till a big wave came and then they plopped into the wave. And this was very daring and exciting. It was in this era, around 1916, which is after the Victorian era, when people started doing ocean swimming. And this was considered to be just a very wild idea. But yes, I know my relatives grew up here and did not, I don't think they ever swam in the water. Ever.
To me, this is, I mean, that was an eye-opening deal for me.
Yeah.
You know, because I had always, you know, and my parents, you know, you live near the ocean and that's, you know, what you do. You go to the beach. Now, do you think you would revisit any of these characters? Because, you know, some of these characters, like the boy, and I'm not going to say very much, one of the women who has to make her own life. Would you ever revisit? Do you ever think of, oh, they have their own story to tell at a later time, and how living through that era may change them? Do you ever think of that?
Sure. Well, to me, all the characters, whether they're based on real people who lived or not, to me, they're at this point, they feel like they're friends.
Mm-hmm.
Start to get into the level of detail and people having conversations with each other.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I mean, this was a very traumatic situation here, especially the third attacks. I would say that little town took them about, well, it was 100 years before they were willing to put up any kind of memorial.
Wow.
Yeah, the other towns got over it more quickly. And it's very interesting who knows about it and who doesn't. Sometimes I feel like the whole world knows about it. Sometimes I think nobody knows about it. One of my publicists for this book grew up in Philadelphia. She spent every summer of her life visiting Beach Haven, which is where the first attack happened. And she didn't know about it. And guess what she found out about it? She was reading the galleys of my book. And she said, oh my God, that happened here. That happened here. So it's interesting the way people, a story can be really famous, but not. Now this story, it really is around here that people call it the story of the original Jaws or the real Jaws. There's never been anything like it before or since. And there is a reference in the film version of Jaws where somebody says, I have to look this up. It's been a while since I watched it. Somebody says, boy, this has never happened before. And somebody else says, wait, yes, it has, the Jersey shark. So there is a reference to it in Jaws. Basically, this incident, this series of attacks, was just a huge wake-up call to people in terms of what they didn't know about the ocean. And it's probably the beginning of when people became fixated, Americans especially, really fascinated by sharks. And we know so much more than we did then. Now they can tag the big whites. And I watched them, I follow this online. They have this whole thing where they can sort of scoop them up on a platform without hurting them and affix a tag, and then they let it go. And as long as they have to surface for a certain period of time, the tag pings. If it pings, it has to ping several times. They know exactly where it is. So they trace where these guys are going. There are a couple right off the shore, right out here right now, chugging along. And they're usually about 250 miles out. That's where they really like to be. But last year there was one that was in 1.5 miles, which seems kind of close.
Yeah. And there's really, you don't really know why this one rogue attack, and if there was just this one shark,
right?
And what made him, because normally humans aren't, we're not seals, and
no. There was something, I really believe there was something wrong with this particular shark. I think it was one shark. I think it was ill in some way or been injured. It's very odd what it was doing to come in right into the shore like that. And no, they're not interested in eating people. They don't really they want to eat seals. So anyway, people around here do at least know if you see seals, go in the water. Now, it's something that everybody has in recent years where they started protecting seals, and the seal populations have come back, like in New England and down here. That is one of the reasons we're seeing more sharks. Which
in a way is good.
Yes, it is.
To the health of the oceans.
They have every right to be here. They have just as much a right to be here as we do. We just have to get along with each other. The other thing that people didn't know around here that really surprised me, and I was shocked about this one. Don't go swimming in the water with a dog. Don't go swimming anywhere near where there is a dog in the water. You know, we see people sitting on the beach right here, and they use a tennis racket and they hit the ball and the retriever goes in and brings it back, and this goes on for hours, and the dogs have a great time. But there's something about the way that dogs swim. The sharks, even from quite a long distance, can sense it, and they think that it's a wounded mammal. So you shouldn't go in the water where there's somebody playing with a dog. You shouldn't go in when there's someone fishing. I mean, or if there's a fishing boat right offshore, and that happens a lot. I'm going to go down to the beach, I'll see a small boat that's fishing. Another thing that I've read about quite a bit and talked to people about is bathing suits. This sounds funny, but apparently if you're dark skinned, you should wear a darker bathing suit. If you're light skinned, wear a light bathing suit. You don't want contrast.
Really?
Yeah. Wow. That's a theory that's, here's another thing. When I have seen these signs, I'm sure you have too, where they say, don't swim alone. All right, well, I always thought don't swim alone meant, well, you should always have a buddy, or because what if you get in trouble and so you can have someone rescue you? That's apparently not what it means. It means if you're swimming alone, you're more likely to be bitten by a shark. Why they don't just say that, I don't know. Maybe
I guess not to. I mean, you read a book like this and you look at the ocean, just like when Jaws came out many, many, many years ago, and with more than just respect, with a little fear, because you don't know and it's not just sharks that are
That's right.
out there.
There's all kinds of things, and they're finding more and more interesting, fascinating things because we can go into the waters deeper than we used to with cameras and so on. And of course, there are many, many different types of sharks, and there's something like 550 types of sharks. Only a few of them are really threatening. But yes, if you want to swim in the ocean, the more people you swim with, the better. That's one of the tips.
Well, we usually swim with a lot, so that makes me feel better.
I'm uneasy about some of the people I've seen in these kayaks, ocean kayakers. They're like right in the water. They're really low. Some of these kayaks look kind of delicate. And I have heard I've had some discussions online with some scientists and people who say they wouldn't do it. Yeah,
I've kayaked out in the ocean, and as you well know, we in Collier County, which is on the west, on the other side of Florida, and you're really low in the ocean, and you have to balance yourself too.
Yes.
So it's quite the trick. And I know we're running up on some time, so one last question. You write both fiction and nonfiction, and you explained why you decided to fictionalize this. What are you working on now, and how did Silent King the Monster influence, if it did, what you did next? Some writers say, I want to work kind of the opposite, I need a rest. But
yes, I'm not sure what I'm doing next. I've never been one of these writers who can really dive into a book when I have a new book that's out, because to me, I'm still living and very much living with this book. So I will take a break probably in the fall and then figure out what I want to do. I started out as a newspaper reporter, And my first books were nonfiction. Having Our Say, the Delaney sisters' first 100 years was my book. And about 15 years ago, well, I started thinking about trying my hand at fiction. And I wrote some Southern fiction. I did live in South Carolina as a girl. And I love the Southern way of speaking. So I wrote my Florida novels, the Collier County novels. And that's based on my husband's family moved from Boston to Collier County, Naples, Florida, which is beautiful now, but at the time was just kind of a buggy, sleepy backwater with no air conditioning. This was the early 60s. And I loved the whole idea of his mother in particular upset everybody immediately, the town fathers. So I really needed to fictionalize that. So I just listened to my own instincts as to what's the best way to tell the story. And in order to tell the story about the shark, I really wanted to tell it about the people. And so I really had to do it as historical fiction. And because we don't know, as you're going along with this, you don't know what's going to happen. It sort of has turned into a thriller. You also are in 1916 in the summer at the shore, and you don't really know where this is going to go. So I loved doing that. So I like the variety of it. The first time I did fiction, though, I really had to give myself permission to do that. But
to make up. It's
oh, absolutely.
As a reporter, a longtime reporter,
right.
You
right.
Totally different parts of the brain almost.
Yes, it is. It is. Yeah.
That has to be really hard to do because you're just, and I always love, I talk to a lot of authors doing this, and they always talk about like the characters talking to them. And so I don't know if you have that, but it's like from a reporter nonfiction, and then to have like, okay, I have to create like dialogue and just like completely different.
It was really hard the first time I tried it, but I tried it on a small scale. I decided I was taking a break from all of everything, and I just played around with the idea of a short story. And what happened was that short story, I felt, oh, this can be something more, and I just went with it. But it was really hard to make that leap the first time. Somebody who's done it very well, Anna Quinlan.
Yes.
Her journalism background, and then she did her novels. It's interesting. It makes life challenging.
Anna, because you write articles too, right? So did you do a nonfiction to a fiction thing too? Or was that something for you?
Pretty much. My first novel was many years ago, and then I had a period where I was raising children and working, and it was just not doable, and then kind of return. But I think journalism teaches you two really important things: the discipline of sitting down to write. I mean, I still have a schedule and I keep to it. And it teaches you to research, the digging for that detail. And sometimes, like I say, I want to go on Jeopardy and just answer questions about 16th century Spain. I know everything about 16th century Spain. And what you use, and Amy, I'm sure you can speak to this, you might use 10%.
Well, I was going to ask that. Was there something that didn't get into the book that you wish would have, or that you had to was there some little tidbit that didn't make it into the book that you were researching about, or was there just too many?
What I found with this book in particular is that I had to over research to get the tiniest little thing right. I didn't have a lot about German U-boats in the story, but I wanted to make sure that the references to the German U-boat was, oh my goodness, that was a tough one to research. I finally got my hands on a book written by a fellow in Germany who's an expert on U-boats. So I have this book. I now know more about U-boats than I ever thought I would. And I didn't really need all of that, but sometimes you really have to go far to get the small thing right.
Well, because if you don't get it right, because if you don't get it right, readers will pick that up.
Right.
And then you're kind of in trouble for the whole book, because it's like, well, if I can't trust that,
right.
Can I trust all the other stuff? So sometimes those details really have to be accurate.
Sometimes this can be frustrating because you run into a wall with a few things, and something that you thought might be easy to research turns out to be difficult. But
yeah. Well, you mentioned something in the conversation that I found super interesting, is the contrast of the bathing suits.
Yeah.
So that's something that's currently right now that people are talking about, that's to try to avoid being attacked.
Yes. Well, they're known for a long time. There are people in parts of the world who are very dark skinned, who fish and swim and dive, and they use dyes and all kinds of things to darken their bottoms of their feet and their hands before they swim. And I guess somebody finally noticed that was brilliant.
Right.
Because it's the flashing back and forth of dark and light that apparently attracts some types of sharks. And remember, though, there's nothing that's universal with any of this. And
well, you made another comment in the green room that I thought was interesting, and I apologize if you already talked about this. I was distracted by something that I was working on for you in the background. You mentioned that sharks now have a lot to eat. Where you're at. So does that mean that the oceans are getting healthier, or is it just the opposite, that there's just like they're coming to places where they weren't before? Or
there's a couple of things with the seals. They're being protected. Their populations started to come back. We have seals here all the time in the winter. There are a lot of seals in the Cape Cod area now, even in the inner area of the Cape. And seals do draw sharks. Now, the interesting thing is the water. I mean, we all know there's terrible problems with like too much plastic and so on. But in terms of the quality of the water, it's better. We have whales out here like crazy. I mean, I had lunch with my husband, and we couldn't even count them all.
Wow.
I mean, there might have been 20 of them.
Wow.
They were chasing menhaden and small fish, and it's amazing. And we have a lot of dolphins. So we have a lot going on here. The biggest problem for the whales are the big container ships. So that's a hazard.
Right.
But I think the big thing is that people are realizing that now that they can tag some of these big great white sharks, we really have for the first time, have an understanding of what they're really doing and where they're going. And they do go down. As a matter of fact, they go down around Florida and they go into the Gulf.
They're crazy. Yeah.
Who knew?
Okay,
that?
talk. I don't think you guys talked about this. But again, apologize if you did. Silently Came the Monster. Was that always the working title, or was that something? No,
it wasn't. We really didn't have. I have to tell you how that came to me. I was thinking in terms of the people at the time and how they talked about one of the scariest things is that sharks don't make any noise. You know, they don't, for something that's about to kill you, it doesn't snarl or growl or shriek or anything.
And they're such fast swimmers too, that it's,
yeah.
For you know how large they are.
Yeah. Well, there's not much. So it was the silence of it was actually spookier in some ways. It's just one less way to be warned. But I kept thinking about it in terms of a monster because the people called it a sea monster. And so I didn't have a great title. And then one night I dreamt it. I went to sleep and I woke up, silent came the monster. Got out of bed, wrote it down, said, that's it. Sent it to everybody that they said, now this is going to sound very strange, but I actually, if I run into a plot problem, because I don't outline or think far ahead at all, if I find I'm spinning my wheels and I just have a plot issue, I go to bed. And I know my brain works on it because when I wake up in the morning, I have figured it out.
It's crazy. Sleep is amazing.
Subconscious.
Yes, it continues to work on it like a math problem.
Well, they say that like what is it, the back of your brain? It's like all that stuff's going on back there.
That's right. I've ever met one other author, novelist, who said that they have that experience. I know it sounds a little odd, but I was very relieved to meet her. So I didn't think I was just,
Well, I think a lot of authors like will go out on a walk to just like kind of,
I think when there's
just to like let your brain,
and you're not doing that. And I'm sure, Amy, that sometimes when you start writing a book or thinking about it, it seems that everything, the universe is conspiring to feed you information. So
that's true.
You might look at a person, you say, oh, wow, I've got to use their face, the shape of their face. Or they've got a scar somewhere, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, we're going to wrap up here in a couple minutes, but Anna, I wanted to ask you, tell us a little bit about Dulcinea. We'd love to hear what that's about. And that just came out, I believe, the beginning of this month. So tell us a little bit about that, your book.
Well, Amy and I share a publisher, and Dulcinea is my reimagining of the character in Don Quixote. And I imagined her not as the maiden and the man of La Mancha or the woman who haunts this demented knight, but a wealthy Barcelona woman who falls in love with an impoverished Miguel Cervantes, because writers even then needed their patrons, and he died being famous, but not by any stretch of the imagination being rich. So they have this essentially kind of forbidden relationship. It comes to light and she faces gossip and ridicule when it comes to light because of everybody knows that the character was named for her. And so the relationship is severed, but years later, he writes her a deathbed note, please come, I'd like to see you one last time. So it's a dual timeline with the same character. She's on her way across Spain, running into the Inquisition, into bandits, into illness, all those things that happen also in Don Quixote, and then also remembering, their love affair. So it's really, to me, it's about second chances and, the regrets we all live with when we get to a certain age.
Which even though it's set in that time period, those are timeless things that happen.
Yes. Exactly.
Right. Ladies, it was so wonderful having both of you. Amy, fascinating discussion about your book. Thank you for coming on with us.
Thank you.
Anna, excellent conversation. So thanks for doing this with us. All right, everybody. Silent Came the Monster, Dulcinea. They're in the link. Buy them from us or from wherever you get your books. So with that, have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Good night. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Julie.
Thank you.
Bye.